This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. You know, I really look forward to my Tuesday conversations with Eric Peters from ericpetersautos.com. So let's get right to him. Eric, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Brian. And I will amen what you just said. It's nice to get together, even if not in person, with people who aren't insane and have a civil conversation.
You have been a voice of reason for a long time. And that's even before we started having these weekly conversations. I've enjoyed reading your writings and your musings, not just on automotive things, but on things pertaining to, you know, individual freedom and current events. And man, things are just intensifying. I wanted to kind of jump in on the idea that I don't think I've ever seen less pretense on the part of the media right now, big media and big tech, to force feed us propaganda that clearly slants in one direction. I'd like to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I agree with you, and I think it was inevitable. I was listening to Jordan Peterson talk about the subject peripherally yesterday, and he was dovetailing with what Solzhenitsyn wrote about. And when he talked about how once lies are accepted, you tend to get more. And before you know it, everybody's lying about everything. And that's when you end up with a tyrannical, chaotic society. And that's where we are now. It's no longer the case that most people are affronted by a lie when it's made, particularly in the context of public policy. Remember when, politicians would get in trouble if they got caught saying something that was untrue and they'd have to defend it.
Right.
We used to hear about Slick Willie and Tricky Dick before him, and now it's just taken as a given that they all lie. Everybody's weary about it, but nonetheless, everybody continues to just lie about this and lie about that, and everybody accepts it and moves on to the next lie. It's very daunting because we no longer have, as a society, as a culture, I think, any ability to really hang on to the truth about things anymore.
No, and we're reaching the point where really, if you want to keep your sanity, you've got to limit your intake of especially mass media because they're basically feeding you the most demoralizing falsehoods with the expectation, you're going to believe this, right? You know, and
Sure.
It'll break you down mentally over time.
Did you happen to catch the interview with that Bill Maher did with Mike Tyson the other day?
I didn't.
Well, it was interesting because they were going back and forth about this issue of biological men competing in women's sports. And, you know, rather than touch on the lie, which is that, sorry, if you were born with male genitalia and male chromosomes, you're a man. It doesn't matter how you or anybody else feels about it. That's the objective truth. Instead, they had a conversation in which they would talk about, for example, Leah Thomas, that man who swam for the University of Pennsylvania, as she. They use the preferred pronouns, which is a lie. He is not a she. He can pretend he's a she all he likes, but he's a she, bottom line. That's the thing. And you know, we're now arrived at this point in our culture and society where people are expected to pretend that lies are true. And that will render us completely insane because you can't have any kind of a coherent understanding of reality if you let go of objective fact and truth.
Well, and the pressure is very real. If you don't pretend along with the rest of us, why, you're a bad person. You're hateful. You're, a bigot and all the other name calling.
Yes. And it was once the case that people who insisted that delusions were true were regarded as mentally ill. And it wasn't a pejorative. It was diagnostic. You know, and a man who actually literally believed that he was literally a physical female because he wore a dress and makeup would have been considered a mentally ill person. And he is a mentally ill person by definition, because it's simply not true. And if you really do believe in things that are objectively not true, there's something wrong with your thought processes.
Yeah, I watch with some amazement, and sadly, I kind of have to immerse myself a little bit in the realm of mainstream media because that's part of my job, as you do as well. You know, to be aware of what's going on. But I'm just amazed at how perfectly and how in unison the mass media pivoted to support Kamala Harris, and now she's got her own Time magazine cover. You know, she is the greatest thing ever, and yet she won't even talk to the press. How interesting.
Yeah, well, that's to be expected. You know, as we know, it's kind of a cliche, but it sometimes bears repeating. there really is no independent mainstream media any longer in this country. It was once the case that there were actually differences, one outlet to another outlet. Now they're all owned essentially by a handful of corporate conglomerates. And so it's natural that they all pivot as if one and regurgitate the same talking points because they're given those talking points by their corporate overlords. That's what they're paid to do.
Well, and this is one of those cases where I kind of want to pick your brain about, so let's talk about how a person can maintain their sanity and still be an effective human being and live a life of purpose and freedom in the face of endless 24/7 propaganda. I'm curious, what do you do to maintain your grip on reality and not get sucked into that vortex of deception?
Well, I try to abide by the dictum of Solzhenitsyn, to get back to that, to live not by lies, to hold on to that which is true, irrespective of how one happens to feel about it. Because sometimes, as the saying goes, the truth does hurt, and it may make one uncomfortable, and it may make other people uncomfortable, but that is by no means a good reason to engage in lying. Stand up for what is true, and that's how we remain sane, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said, too, for recognizing that we have more control over our lives than the people feeding us all this propaganda would want us to believe. And if we put our focus
Absolutely.
on things like, I'm going to throw out the word character, for instance. If you're more focused on building and maintaining sound character, you are going to be far more impervious to their efforts, and you'll be a lot less likely to get dragged into, even inadvertently, participating in the lie.
Sure. And let's not be like leftists. Leftists are obsessed with controlling other people. It's far more productive, to say nothing of far more moral, to control yourself. You have control over your own thoughts. You have control over your own actions. So exercise that control. It's empowering, as opposed to being degraded by constantly having to try to control other people, which is what authoritarians on the left and the right seem obsessed with doing.
And you'll notice that the control freaks are among the unhappiest people. There's a reason we call them Karens, right? The HOA presidents out there, trying to ruthlessly control every little thing.
Psychologically, I think that's a very important thing to note. And you're right. These authoritarian types are usually miserable people. They're bitter, they're angry, they're contentious. And there's an element of sadism in there that's mixed in with their own masochism. They're miserable, so they want you to be miserable. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic. I put that in air fingers quotes always, where it wasn't enough that they had to walk around with the mask on. They had to have you wear one too. They wanted misery to be general, and I thought that was very revelatory then, and I think it still is now.
I think it's Dennis Prager who talks about, he likens to us each having a moral bank account. And basically by your actions, your thoughts, your words, you're either making deposits or you're withdrawing from that moral bank account. Now, this requires a little bit of self-awareness, but if you're aware of it and if you're paying attention, look, when you allow yourself to get angry or to lash out at people, that's a withdrawal from your moral bank account. And one of the things that I feel, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but I feel like we're being provoked and we're being antagonized in the hopes that we will lash out. The more that we can resist this by, again, focusing on our own character and what we can control as opposed to trying to control others, I think that the less likely we are to get pulled into somebody else's game.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And related to that is the matter of what we like to call good ideas, Good ideas don't require force. So if you think you have a good idea, then defend it. Explain it to people. Point out why you think it's a good idea. And if it is a good idea, you'll find that people will agree with you, and it won't be necessary to force them to do things. The other day, Tim Waltz, our putative next vice president, equated socialism with neighborliness, which I thought was absolutely fascinating because, again, neighborliness, really? Well, when I go over to my neighbor's house and ask if, hey, can I borrow your wood splitter or your wood chipper or whatever it happens to be? I'm not forcing him to let me borrow it. And, if he thinks I'm a responsible guy and I'm not going to break it, he can loan it to me. And that's a very different thing than the kind of neighborliness that's espoused by people like Waltz.
Isn't it interesting that centrally planned socialism, the kind of things that Tim Walz stands for, is being couched in this friendly language. I mean, even, and I'm going to go back to the media talking points for Kamala Harris. Now they're describing her and Tim Walz as, why, this is the joyful alternative to a Trump presidency. And I just think, wow, there's nothing joyful about enslaving your neighbor, but hey, you do you.
You know what it is? It's a revivification of what happened in the old Soviet Union, where everybody was a comrade. They used the same kind of mind. I'm not going to use I'm not going to drop the bomb here, but you know what I mean. Yeah. On people where you're a Tovarich, you're a comrade. We're all in this together, and they would have these group sing-alongs and sitting around the bonfires. And now, all kumbaya. Yeah, we're all, where everybody loves everybody else. In fact, everybody came to hate everybody else, because it was understood that everything was ultimately based upon force. It wasn't your neighbor asking you for something. It was, hey, you better hand that over. If you don't give it to me, I'm going to call up the KGB, and they're going to come and take you off to a camp somewhere. That's the kind of comradeship that we're dealing with people like Walz and Harris. I
remember seeing a comic from Stone Toss lately, if you're familiar with Stone Toss. And here's this chubby person wearing their hammer and sickle shirt and saying, actually, communism is about helping people. And here's a bystander who says, well, I disagree. And the communist says, I am going to ruin your life.
Yes,
that's neighborliness.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's just such a simple, basic thing, and it has to be relearned apparently roughly every 50 years or so. If socialism or communism are such good things, why is it necessary to force people to go along with it? Why not just say, look, what a great idea, here it is. They can never answer that question because they don't want to talk about the violence and force that underlies their economic and moral position.
Or the body count. I mean, we'll hear endlessly, the Nazis killed this many million people, and yeah, that was evil, but have you ever tallied up how many bodies were stacked up by Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot?
Sure.
Lots more.
Sure. Yeah, I think Hitler's gravest sin was that he was a national socialist as opposed to an international socialist like Stalin and Mao. One of the bugaboos of the left is that they despise nationalism. So as long as you're not a national socialist, it's okay to mass murder millions of people.
So let's shift gears to a slightly more uplifting topic, and that is poverty. No, I'm kind of half joking, but
Yay!
You and I were talking before we went on the air about the way things are headed economically. And by the way, if the economy's doing well, they wouldn't have to tell us every day on the news, right? I mean, we'd be able to pretty much see with our own eyes, okay, yeah, things are going well. But we're being reassured, the economy is doing just fine, and actually, crime is down too. And but I have this sense that in the near future, we are probably going to have to readjust our expectations of the material comforts that we take for granted right now. Now, I'm not saying we're going to be staggering around in rags, but I believe that right now the economy is very difficult for a lot of people. I see people treading deep water. I'd like to get your take on this about where we are economically and, what do we need to do as far as managing our expectations as we move forward through what remains of this crisis?
Well, I think for most of us, I think it's self-evident where we are. All it takes is a trip to the grocery store to get a sense of that. As far as how to deal with it, I think one of the ways that we can deal with it is actually a positive thing. I think to a great extent, a lot of us have gotten used to living beyond our means and spending money on things we don't really need, that frankly are luxuries that we can readily do without. You and I talked a little bit off the air about when we were young and remembering that we didn't have cars with air conditioning for the most part, because back in those days, back in the 70s and 80s, air conditioning was an option for most people. And most people did without it. You had a wing vent window, you rolled down the window. And most of the time the windows were manual. And it wasn't that big a deal. And, we were used to that. And now we've gotten used to having power windows and climate control air conditioning. And it may become necessary to do without those things. And that's not necessarily such a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't want people to mistake what we're saying here as, you guys have just thrown your hands in the air and this is just this fatalistic surrender. This is dealing with reality as it is and not as we wish it were. And frankly, I wish the economy were booming and that, everything was still cheap and affordable, but it's not going that way. And it's likely to get more complicated. I mean, look at how many flashpoints we have right now where serious conflict could break out that will impact the supply of everything. I'm not wishing for it. I'm just acknowledging that threat is there. And I think the people who can get their minds around it ahead of time are going to be a lot less miserable than the ones who find themselves standing in line for whatever.
Well, I agree with you. And to be very clear, I think we have a deeper problem that predates everything that's been going on now politically. We have now gotten very used to being comfortable with debt that our grandparents and their parents before them would have been appalled by. Most people don't think anything about getting into a 6-year loan that costs them $600 a month or a nothing special SUV. And as a result of that, it's had a riptide effect. And now you can't even buy a basic pickup truck anymore. You know, you have to spend $40,000 generally minimum to get a 4-wheel drive pickup today, which is just nuts. I think it would be nice if we once again had the opportunity to buy a basic truck for work. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Or how about a basic economy car that costs $10,000 or $11,000? Granted, it's not going to have a high horsepower engine and it may not have climate controlled air conditioning, but so what? You'll have money in your pocket and that will help weather storms to come. We used to understand that. Now I've read somewhere, and you probably have read this as well, that most Americans couldn't come up with $1,000 for an unexpected expense, such as having to buy a new refrigerator. And there's a reason for that. And it's a reason that predates Biden, Harris, and Trump and all the rest of it.
And there's a mindset that goes along with this. And I'm very grateful. I have a brother-in-law who I think he's been through the Dave Ramsey course about, getting out of debt. But this guy is meticulous about, I will not buy things on time. And so he and his wife have been saving for the last few years. And he says so many times they were tempted, as their cars are starting to wear out. But they saved and saved because he says, the next car we buy, we will pay cash for. And it took him, 3 or 4 years. But they just saved up. They bought a brand new Subaru. They paid cash for it. And he tells me about the peace of mind that comes from that. I don't think he's flexing. I think he's trying to share a lesson that anybody, could access if they're willing to exercise some self-discipline.
Yeah. And, to get back to the pandemic, I was lucky in that I was not beholden to an employer because I don't have all this debt hanging over my head. A lot of people who simply had to keep their job if they didn't want to lose their house or if they wanted to be able to continue to feed their family because they had so much debt, had to hold on to whatever job they had. So when that job told them, you got to wear a mask, and then that job told them, you got to get a vaccination. Well, they got the mask and they got the vaccine, didn't they? Whereas if in the back of your head, hey, if my boss turns out to be a jerk and if my company goes woke and I really don't want to deal with these people anymore, I've got the resources to not have to work for, say, 6 months or a year while I figure it out and find another way to make a living. That is even more reassuring to me.
And I hope more people will get their minds around the idea that freedom brings a comfort all its own, even if sometimes you have to shed a little bit of comfort in order to fully, enjoy your freedom or more fully enjoy it.
Absolutely.
That right now we're so, we're so indoctrinated into the idea that everything should take 30 seconds like a microwave, to fulfill my needs. But if you can lower your expectations of comfort and your need, to have the latest, greatest, smartphone or whatever, you'd be surprised how great life can be and how nice it is. I know you wrote recently about how our cars, monitor us and spy on us.
Yeah.
I see you, you see me, I think was the name of the article you published.
Yeah.
You're not giving up a lot to settle for less car than you think you deserve, but you might actually save yourself a little bit of privacy in the process.
Yeah, it's all about future time orientation. I, like anybody else, am vulnerable to the temptation of convenience. We want it right now, right? Just like little kids, we want it right now. I'm hungry. Give me something to eat. Oh boy, my car broke. I want it fixed right now. And it takes training of your brain muscle to resist the temptation and to act in a more mature manner and think about it and do something that has a sounder basis in long-term future planning.
So let's talk automotive stuff here for just a moment. I know you're constantly writing about and reviewing different cars. Anything of interest that has sat in your driveway recently?
Gosh, you gave me a stumper here because this week I'm driving another crossover SUV. The Mazda CX-30, which is for a crossover, it's a nice enough little ride, and it's a different enough little ride in that at least it comes with an appropriately sized engine. A 2.5 liter engine, which these days is a big engine. Most of the vehicles in this class have, if they're lucky, a 2.0 liter or even a smaller engine. And so because of that, they need a turbo on top of that to get that little engine to make some more power. The Mazda's engine doesn't need the turbo, which is a really good thing in terms of long-term, down-the-road longevity and decreased potential repair costs. So I really like that about it. As far as anything else that's on the horizon that's neat and interesting, my God, I'm drawing a blank. And that's a kind of a testimony to the state of the car industry. Actually, I have a thought, though. I went to this local dealer that specializes in quirky old cars and import cars a couple of days ago, and they had a 78 Mustang II King Cobra. Remember that one?
Yes, I do.
For sale for $32,000. And I got to thinking, you know what? I'd pay that if I had $32,000 rather than buy anything new. And it's a measure of just how bad things are in the new car market that a mid-late 70s Mustang II has become so appealing. And the place is full of cars like that, and so many different and interesting kinds of cars, which we just don't see anymore.
I have to admit, with a small degree of shame, my very first vehicle that I purchased was a 1976 Mustang II. Now, it looked nice, but it was a glorified Pinto. I mean, that's really all it was.
Yeah, it holds the distinction of having, I think, the least powerful V8 that Ford put into a modern V8 that Ford put into any modern vehicle. It was even in the Cobra model. I think it made like 122 horsepower out of a 5-liter V8.
Wow. Unbelievable. Well, Eric, I've appreciated our conversation today. Thanks again for the time that you take to sit down with me each week. I'll include a link to your website and another exciting week ahead of us. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about next Tuesday as well.
Yep, we'll see you in the gulag.
All right, we'll see you there. Eric Peters from Eric Peters Autos has been my guest. Again, you will find the link in my show notes at thebryanhydeshow.com. These are the show notes for August 13th, 2024. If you haven't subscribed, consider hitting the subscribe button and doing so.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.